Hi guys, welcome. In the last video, we discussed many things from the book called How to Win Friends and Influence People. In this video, we are going to continue where we left from the chapter. If you want to gather any, don't kick over the behave. So let's begin. My dear General, I do not believe you appreciate the magnitude of the misfortune involved in Lee's escape. He was within our easy grasp, and to have closed up his words in connect with our other late successes have ended the war. As it is, the war will be prolonged indefinitely. If you could not safely attack let last Monday, how can you possibly do so south of the river when you can take with your very few no more than two-thirds of the forest you then had in hand? It would be unreasonable to expect, and I do not expect that you can not affect much. Your golden opportunity is gone, and I am distressed immeasurably because of it. What do you suppose Mead did when he read this letter? Mead never saw this letter. Lincoln never mailed it. It was found among his paper after his death. My guess is, and this is only a guess, that after writing that letter, Lincoln looked out of the window and said to himself, "Just a minute, maybe I ought not to be so hasty. It is very enough for me to sit here in the queue of the White House and order Meade to attack. But if I had been up at Gettysburg, and if I had seen as much blood as Meade has seen during the last week, and if my ear had been pierced with the scream and strikes of the wounded and my dying, maybe I would not be so anxious to attack either. If I had Meade's timid temperament, perhaps I would have done just what he had done. Anyhow, it is water under the bridge now. If I send this letter, it will reveal my feeling, but it will make Meade try to justify himself. It will make him condemn me. It will arouse hard feeling, impair all this further usefulness as a commander, and perhaps force him to resign from the army. So, as I have already said, Lincoln put the letter aside, for he had learned by bitter experiments that shape Christmas and rebukes almost invariable end in futility. Theodore Roosevelt said that when he, as president, was confronted with a perplexing problem, he used to lean back and look up at a large painting of Lincoln which hung above his desk in the White House, and ask himself, what would Lincoln do if he were in my shoes? How would he solve this problem? Mark Twain lost his temper occasionally and wrote letter that turned the paper brown. For example, he once wrote to a man who had aroused his ire. The thing for you is a burial permit. You have only to speak and I will see that you get it. On another occasion, he wrote to an editor about a proofreader attempt to improve my spelling and punctuation. He ordered said the matter according to my copy hereafter and see that the proofreader retain his suggestion in the musk of his decayed brain. He writing to this stinging letter made Mark Twain feel better. They allowed him to blow off steam and the letter did not to do any real harm because Mark's wife secretly lifted them out of the mail. They were never sent. Do you know someone you would like to change and regulate and improve? Good, that is fine. I am all in favor of it. But why not being on yourself? From a purely selfish standpoint, that is a lot more profitable than trying to improve others. Yes, and a lot less dangerous. Don't complain about the snow on your neighbor's roof. Say confusion when your own doorstep is unclear. When I was still young and trying hard to impress people, I wrote a foolish letter to Richard Harding Davis, an author who once loomed large on the literary horizon of America. I was preparing a magazine article about author and I asked David to tell me about his method of work. A few weeks earlier, I had received a letter from someone with this notation at the bottom: dictated but not read. I was quite impressed. I feel that the winter must be very big and busy and important. I wasn't the slightest bit busy, but I was eager to make an impression on Richard Harding Davis, so I ended my short note with the word dictated but not read. He never troubled to answer the letter. He simply returned it to me with these scribbles across the bottom: your bad manner are exceeded only by your bad manner. True, I had blustered and perhaps I described this rebuke, but being human, I reasoned it so sharply that when I read of the death of Richard Harding Davis 10 years later, the one thought that still persists in my mind, I am ashamed to admit, was the heart he had given me. If you and I want to strip up a resentment tomorrow that may rankle across the decades and endured until death, just let us indulge rankle across the decades and endure until death. Just let us indulge in a little singing criticism, no matter how certain we are that it is justified. When deadline with people, let us remember what we are not dealing with creators of logic. We are dealing with creators of emotion, creators bristling with prejudice and motivated by pride and vanity. Bitter criticism caused the sensitive Thomas Hardy, one of the finest novelists ever to enrich English literature, to give up for, forever the writing of fiction. Criticism drove Thomas Chatterton, the English poet, to suicide. Benjamin Franklin, tactless in his youth, because so diplomatic, so adroit at handling people, that he was made American ambassador to French. The secret of his success: I will speak will of no man, he said, and speak all the good I know of everybody. Any fool can criticize, condemn, and complain, and most fools do, but it takes chatter and self control to be understanding and forgiving. A great man show his greatness, said Carlyle, by the way he treats little men. Bob Hoover, a famous test pilot and frequent performer at air show, was returning to his home in Los Angeles from an air show in San Diego. As described in the magazine, first flight operators at 300 feet in the air, both engines suddenly stopped. By deft maneuvering, he managed to land the plane, but it was damaged, although nobody was hurt. Hoover's first act after the emergency landing was to inspect the airplane's fuel, just as he suspected the World War II propeller plane he had been flying had been fueled with jet fuel rather than gasoline. Upon returning to the airport, he asked to see the machine who had serviced his plane. The young man was sick with the agony of his mistake. Tears streamed down his face as Hoover approached. He had just caused the loss of a very expensive plane and could have caused the loss of 3 lives as well. You can imagine, however, a hanger. One could anticipate the tongue lashing that this proud and preceding pilot would unleash for that carelessness. But however, did not scold the mechanic. He did not even criticize him. Instead, he put his big arm around the man's shoulder and said, "To show you, I am sure that you will never do this again. I want you to service my F51 tomorrow. Often parents are tempted to criticize their children. You would expect me to say don't, but I would not, will not. I am merely going to say, before you criticize them, read one of the classic of American journalism, Father Forgets. It originally appeared as an editorial in the People's Home Journal. We are reporting it here with the author's permission as condensed in the Reader's Digest. Father Forgets is one of those little pieces which dashed off in a moment of sincere feeling, strikes an echoing chord in so many readers as to become a perennial reprint favorite. Since its first appearance, Father Forgets had been reproduced, writes the author W. Livingston Lerner, in hundreds of magazines and house organs and in newspaper the country over. It has been reprinted almost as extensively in many foreign languages. I have given personal permission to thousands who wishes to read it from school, church and lecture platform. It has been on the air of countless occasions and programmers. Oddly enough, college periodically has used it and high school magazines. Sometimes a little piece seems mysteriously to click. This one certainly did. Listen, son, I am saying this as you lie asleep. One little paw crumpled under your cheek and the blunt curl strictly wet on your damp forehead. I have stolen into your room along just a few minutes ago as I sat reading my paper in the library. A stifling wave of remorse swept over me. Guiltily, I came to your bedside. There are the things I was thinking, son. I had been cross to you. I scolded you as you were dressing for school because you gave your face merely a dab with a towel. I took you to task for not cleaning your shoes. I called out angrily when you throw some of your things on the floor. At breakfast, I found fault too. You spilled things. You gulped down your food. You put your elbow on the table. You spread butter too thick on your bread. And as you started off to play and I made for my train, you turned and waved a hand and called, "Goodbye, Daddy." And I frowned and said in reply, hold your shoulder back. Then it began all over again in the later afternoon. As I came up the road, I spied you down on your keys playing marble. These were hold in your stockings. I humiliated your before your boyfriends by mentioning you ahead of me to house. Shockings were expensive, and if you had to buy them, you would be more careful. Imagine that, son from a father. Do you remember later when I was reading in the library how you came in timely with a sort of hurt look in your eyes when I glanced up over my paper, impatience at the interruption? You hesitated at the door. What is it you want? I snapped. You said nothing, but ran across in one's tempter's plung and threw your arms around my neck and kissed me. And your small arm tightened with an affection that God had set blooming in your heart and which even neglect could not wither. And then you were gone, pattering up the stairs. Well, son, it was shortly afterwards that my paper slipped from my hands and a terrible, sickening fear came over me. What has habit been doing to me? The habit of finding fault, of reprimanding. This was my reward to you for being a boy. It was not that I did not love you, it was that I expect too much of youth. I was measuring you by the yardsticks of my own years, and there was so much that you good and fine and true in your characters. The little heart of you was as big as the dawn itself. Over the wide hills, this was shown by your spontaneous impulse to rush in and kiss me good night. Nothing else mattered. Tonight, son, I have come to your beside in the darkness and I have knelt there, ashamed. It is a feeble atonement. I know you would not understand this thing if I told them to you during your waking hours, but tomorrow I will be a real daddy. I will chum with you and suffers when you suffer and laugh when you laugh. I will bite my tongue with when impatient words come. I will keep saying as if it were a ritual. He is nothing but a boy, a little boy. I am afraid I have visualized you as a man. Yet, as I see you now, son, crumpled and weary in your cot, I see that you were still a baby yesterday. You were in your mother's arm, your head on her shoulder. I have asked too much, too much. Instead of condemning people, Let's try to understand them. Let's try to figure out why they do what they do. That's a lot more profitable and intriguing that criticism, and it breeds sympathy, tolerance, and kindness. To know all is to forgive all. As Dr. Johnson said, God Himself does not propose to judge man until the end of his day. Why should you and I? Principle 1. Don't criticize, condemn, or complain. That's all, guys. We finally finished the chapter. The chapter is, if you want to gather any, don't kick over the behave. See you in next video. Wait for it.